3:30 here in Hobart. We're at the Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania, and there's been plenty happening in the last week. So I'll give you a bit of an overview now of all those things, and then we'll get on to the question and answer session. We had plenty of questions. We had to shut it down. So if you've got more questions, we'll try and do it again next week. Although we'll be flying back to France then, so we'll give it our best. Just for now, a quick update on Tapio's progress. If you're watching the tracker, you'll see he went the opposite way, started heading back down the Southern Ocean. That's because he was becalmed, and there's a current going down there, so that 1 knot current took him south. Now there's a very light breeze that's filled in, and he's coming back north, but by the look of it, it's going to be a very late arrival. He's going to sail for an hour or two, but then the wind's going to drop right out. He'll become becalmed again. When it does start to fill in about 3 or 4 hours later, it'll be a light headwind, and it's really hard to predict exactly how long it'll take. He might not be here till 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. So it's a case of watch this space. He certainly had a pretty good run down the coast, had a good run last night, and he's quite comfortable. He's enjoying the scenery. He's got plenty of birds and dolphins and seals and very spectacular coastline, so he's happy to have all that. And at this stage, he's only intending to stop for a very short time, probably only the minimum time when he gets in, although we've told him it'd be nice to see him in daylight to get some pictures, but it's going to be entirely up to him. But we had a chat. He made a call just to check in, part of the procedure, and his intention at this stage is possibly only to stay for a few hours, but that could all change. So watch this space. Anyway, we'll save the update for Jean-Luc at the end. I'll start with the fleet back over at Igor, right over to the west. And Igor is flying today. He's doing 5 knots, which is fantastic. Good to see him really going for it. He decided not to stop at Amsterdam Island in the end, and he's now making his way. Same with Mark Sinclair. He's making reasonably good progress, so we'll look forward to seeing them down. Oh, we've got a few things going on here today at the Yacht Club. Big day in Australia. It's called the Melbourne Cup. It's a horse race, and it's the biggest sporting event of the year, and it happens now. So if there's funny noises at the back, it's the Melbourne Cup about to take off. So then we come across, as I say, Tapio's in. So we had Istvan call in. Now he had a real chase. He was running in front of the blow that Tapio was in. Tapio survived that, I should say. We didn't talk about his storm, obviously, and he hasn't said a lot about it yet. He coped with it pretty well, and I'm sure he'll tell us the story when we do the lives once he arrives. When Istvan came around the corner, he did try to get into research, and you probably saw all those lives we did, so I won't go through it again, but he was happy to get in. He enjoyed the stopover. All his friends over the other side of the world enjoyed the lives, and we got a problem. Anyway, I don't know whether you can hear this, but anyway, it looks like a bad timing for us. And now he's on his way again. He's happy to be in the hunt. The boat's going well, so he's now chasing Suzy. And then Suzy, of course, that was a whole turnaround when she was in the bay waiting for the weather. It was very depressing for her. It would have been really hard psychologically, but now she's underway. She's psyched up. None of these people, none of the entrants actually know what's going on with Jean-Luc at the moment, and that might change their perspective. We're all a bit shattered. But anyway, Suzy's on the hunt to try and track down Uku. Uku, his storm that we talked about didn't eventuate into being anything really huge. It was a solid breeze, but it broke apart sort of not long after he got into it, so he was happy he survived all that. And that was a good storm where you had the wind coming from the south or from one direction all the time. So the sea builds up, the wind builds up, but it's sort of organised, and they're the tidy ones. They're the ones you want. So he got through that, and he's enjoying his sailing now. Mark Slats is doing well, no dramas, in fact he's quite happy. He did get hooked up with that little system that we thought was going to miss him, but it reformed around him and gave him a bit of heavy weather, but again moving well, heading towards Cape Horn. So then we've been busy with all that, and then our nights seemed to disappear, and then 2 o'clock this morning, our time, we get the call from Jean-Luc. We knew the storm wasn't going to be too good because it was quite a good one. He would have been getting winds over 70 knots, or gusting up to 70 maybe. Big seas, and he did take a big knockdown. He probably had other little ones, I'm not sure. You've probably read the reports, 150 degrees, but the damage, just to clarify that, on the mast, and you may want to look back at the live video we did. I did it with Robin Davey in Les Sables d'Olonne. looking at his previous mast, and you'll see the fittings that we're talking to him if you're not a sailor. There are 4 wires that come down from below the first spreader, 2 on each side of the boat. One goes forward, one goes back. They're called the lowers. And there's a bolt that goes through the mast, and it has, imagine a bolt going through the pipe, it has some straps going up above that which are riveted into the mast, and that whole thing's failed, and it tore through the mast section and dropped down about 5 centimetres, so a couple of inches, which is not a good thing because it immediately makes all your rigging slack. It's put a rip in your mast section, which weakens the section. So there must have been some serious loads on it when it did take a severe knockdown. 150 degrees, nearly a rollover, but not quite, and he would have had sails up at the time. I believe he hadn't confirmed that. So the loads were impressive. The rig stayed there, but it did get damaged. So he went under bare poles during the night, probably read the reports, and everything's fine. He got out of that one, the wind died down, and he's been able to do some jury repairs simply by tightening the rigging, and he went up and adjusted something at the spreaders as well. And now he's sitting tight until this next blow forms, because it's actually wrapped around. He's getting hit from the opposite direction now, from the same low pressure system. The system itself's not moving. These storms, usually when they're forming, they move from the west across to the east. Sometimes they can move very fast, 15 knots or 20 knots as a storm. But this one's really pretty stationary. It's probably only moving at 2 or 3 knots while it's intensifying and turning up. So he'll get some more heavy weather, not a major storm, but still solid. Could be 45 knots, gusting 50. 7 metre seas are predicted. And when he gets through that, he'll have 24 hours of pretty quiet weather. In fact, one period of 12 hours could be completely calm, no wind, maybe a bit of sea, and he'll have a chance then to look at what's going on. There's a few people there that are looking at the issue. The mast maker is looking at the issue and how it happened and what repairs he can be made. But Jean-Luc himself, we've had a couple of phone calls, has decided that he is going to port, and that has various ramifications. And at this stage, he's changing the ports he may go to. So we'll just watch this space, and he'll decide where he wants to go. And once he's at that port and makes the repairs, he'll decide what he wants to do and how he tackles it from there. So at this stage, everything's up in the air. It's an incredible blow for everyone. You know, first of all, Jean-Luc is shattered, but happy Jean-Luc. You know, same guy on the phone when he rang. We get the phone, you know, say, "Hello, Jean-Luc, how's things?" And he says, "Well, not good, but I'm okay." And then he proceeded to tell us what happened. So it's terribly disappointing for him. You know, major effort. I doubt whether he's going to enter 22. You know, he's not a young fella. So he hasn't achieved his goal in many ways, but let's wait and see how it pans out. From our perspective, and all of yours, I know everyone's been amazed at Jean-Luc's efforts to be where he is. It's a race. It has various challenges, and you call the shots. Jean-Luc calls the shots. You know, he's decided on a rig the way it is, and you know, he's made calculations, and that's the price you pay. Whatever, extreme loads, it's the name of the game. So very unfortunate indeed, and I know everyone's wishing him well, and hope he's safe during the next blow that comes through. So watch this space, and we'll see how it pans out. That's really about it from there. We'll be doing live, obviously, with Tapio when he comes in, and we'll catch up with him and look forward to getting a story. So now we'll go straight into the questions and answers. First one was from Steve Cottrell. If an entrant was to come across an abandoned vessel like Gregor's boat and went alongside and decided to scavenge things off the boat, would that be considered outside assistance? You know, I mean, first of all, it would be nearly impossible to do that because you couldn't get from your boat to the other one unless it was flat calm. But if it did happen, there's a possibility it may be considered to be not outside assistance because it's just something floating around and there's no people there, and it's flopsome and jetsam. It's like picking up a bit of rubbish in the water, you know. So you know, hypothetical, but they might get away with it. Okay, Terry Senenshell, what's up with Igor's boat? You know. Well, we've often wondered the same. We are wondering the same, and we're monitoring that. We find, as an organiser, it's hard for us to talk to Igor because he doesn't speak English. But his managers and his team are talking regularly through ham radio operators, and I've asked them to check with Igor on various things. But it's just, for now, good to see him moving at 5 knots. He's got a long way to go to Hobart, but we'll monitor that situation all the way. And sometimes I understand the question, you know, what's up with Igor? We're not quite sure, but he's sailing well at the moment. Okay, Willie Go. What was Mark doing at Gregor's boat? Well, Mark was heading towards going to the east, obviously, to Hobart, and he was going to come very close to Gregor's boat. It was discussed, and he thought, oh, it'd be nice to call in and have a look, and I said, yeah, that's fine, because it gives us a visual. So he's confirmed that the AIS is working on Gregor's boat, that it's floating high in the water, so it's not likely to sink at any moment, and confirmed the tracker's working and all that sort of stuff. So that was pretty easy. We did give him coordinates to get to Gregor's boat. That's how he found it. So he was able to go range and bearing for that converging situation. Paul Stinson, what type and how much clothing is carried on board the boats with the entrance? Now, they've all got different brand names, but they're all very similar in concept. They're all using a layered system, so you have thermal underwear very close to your skin. Some of them are using synthetics, some are using wool, really super fine wool. But that's the first layer. The next layer is like a fibre pile layer. That's the middle layer, and that's something that's bulking them up, and it's usually synthetic, and that creates a space, like an airspace, between your outer layer and the inner, and it's a warm, thermal layer, gives you insulation, usually thick and bulky. And then after that, usually it's a Gore-Tex material, so it's breathable. That's very important for staying warm and dry. And it's they're using ocean versions of that. You would have seen Istvan's Helly Hansen when he came in, and some of the others are using Musto and so on. And they're usually the ocean variety. Got lots of reinforcing, lots of physical features, really good hoods and collars to sort of snug yourself down when you've got these big winds and cold, water flashing around and stuff. Then socks, I mean, I don't know. I've never talked to them about their socks and gloves personally. I know when I was doing it, that's the biggest challenge, to get the right sort of socks and boots and the right sort of gloves. And there's no easy combination, because water and breathing and dry and keeping your hands workable don't mix. It's a very hard thing to get just the right combination. So I'm not sure. They're all using different ones. But you can see different things, and I'm sure there'll be people talking about it at the end as well. In terms of sets, I mean, usually they've got a couple of sets of each, because you can damage them. They could burn in the galley. You could get something blown over the side. When one's really wet, you might want to use the other one. They can get torn and ripped. So most would have a minimum of 2 sets of something, and even a couple of pairs of boots and things like that. Interesting to hear Istvan talk about these leather boots. They're breathable boots. They're probably a way to go. Okay. Yvonne Cooligan asked, with the split of the boats, the fleet now, we're halfway around the world, from where Jean-Luc was to where Igor was, would we consider putting in a time gate, to make the entrance? They have to get to a certain place before a certain time, or they're out of the event. We're actually discussing that in all the sailors are interested in 2022. That's a topic of discussion that came up. I don't think it'll happen. It may. It is a race. The original spirit of the Golden Globe was for it to be a race. It's not just a cruise around the world. Every one of the 9 that started was racing. They were, Sir Robin was looking over his shoulder all the time at Matessia, things like that. So it's a real race. But if it was ever to be a time gate, it would probably be using something like the speed of Suhaili. As long as you can stay in front of Suhaili, by the time you get to Hobart, you're there. But as I say, we've got to be very careful when you do things like that. I don't think it'll happen, but it's a topic of discussion. It's a race, and we want to see people out there putting the big effort to keep going. Ruth Sanders, is Igor okay? Because his course is all over the place. Well, we've discussed that. We believe he is. His course being all over the place, by the way, is partly weather driven, because he went up north. They're high. It's so critical to be down on 40. Those sort of 300 miles or so makes a huge difference on the wind. If you're watching it on Windy TY, you can see, that 40 is just a beautiful place to be. So you get headwinds, you go somewhere else. You get tailwinds, you go straight line. So that's part of the reason he's all over the place. Okay. So Ian Hallett, what was the issue with Suzy's wind vane, and how was it fixed? It's an interesting point. She's got a monitor, stainless steel servo pendulum system, that has the blade pulling ropes to go onto the ship's tiller. And at some point, a big wave had hit it, right? And it had overloaded the servo blade, or possibly hit it from the bottom. And there are some bevel gears there, these gears that mesh into each other to change an up and down motion of the conrod coming from the flip-flop vane to actually turning the pendulum gear. And when it took that big hit, it actually jumped the tooth, like the sprocket went up and boom and jumped the tooth. Also, a little bearing at the back of the spindle shaft had popped out, so it meant it was a bit loose, and that allowed the spindle shaft to possibly move a little bit way, or the bevel gears move a little bit open, so they could actually skip a notch. So the first fix was a 4-hour fix, or 4 or 5 or 6 hour fix, taking the whole thing off the back of the boat. We discussed it, and it was like a nightmare, and Suzy thought, oh well, we got to do it. So she was just starting to do it, and then we got a call from the manufacturer, and he said, no, there's an easy fix. And this conrod sort of arrangement that comes down from the flip-flop vane goes up and down, it has an adjustment on it, and if you take that off, the bevel gears then freewheel 360 degrees. So we're able to do that, move it right around, and then remesh it and close them up again. We push the bearing in the back of the spindle shaft that this whole thing, the pendulum blade, flops on, and put it back together. 20-minute fix. It was fantastic. And the good news was that Suzy knows how to do it now. So if it happened again, and it may, because even the manufacturer, the guys were saying, oh yeah, they were just talking about it, and it can happen if a boat hits you in the marina, it can overload it and skip the bevel gears. Or if it happens with a big sea, it can whack it and jump it off the bevel gears. But she can fix it easily next time now. So that was a very successful situation. Stephen Panua, what's your opinion on the monitor safety tube? Now, and because he thinks they're too light maybe, and as many have failed in the race. Well, the short story is they're meant to fail. All it is now if you can concentrate on the pendulum rudder in the water going from side to side, it's quite a serious blade. It's about that wide, and it's about, so long. And it's just on a stainless steel shaft. If that took a big hit or a big wave sideways, it could overload the frame or the gear, because nothing's bulletproof. So the idea is that coupling is meant to fail first. So the blade will overload and the coupling would just kink. It's a thinner stainless steel tube, and you have 4 or 5 or 6 spare tubes, and if that happens, you unbolt it and put a new tube in. Now, how strong do you make it? It needs to be weak enough to break so it doesn't break the vane. It needs strong enough to hold it there if you're in a big storm. Now, as you know, RA lost his brake tube on the monitor in his storm, and it was while he hand steered for as long as he could, and it was while he was doing that, then he stopped to fix his tube, and then he was rolled and dismasted when he was hove to. So that's a problem. If it hadn't have broken, he'd be okay. Suzy broke hers in the big storm that she had, and had to hand steer for like 10 hours or something. Not a nice thing to do. But I've got to say, all pendulum systems usually have that. Aries has got the same. Aries has an aluminium tube that's designed to snap, and you have a safety rope on your rudder. So it's an engineering thing, and it's one of the issues that you play with when you have a servo pendulum gear, and you got to hope it doesn't break at the wrong time. So I wouldn't say, I don't know, but I wouldn't say it's too weak, because maybe if it was stronger so it didn't break in a storm, then you're going to break your wind vane. That's worse. You can't fix it necessarily. At least you can replace the tube. So that's an interesting topic, but that's the best explanation I can give for you. Alex Sayman, GGR, wanted to know, it's on every 4 years. He wanted to know if it's on again 8 years from now, and so on. Yes, if all goes well and we get some financial support and so on, well, it's going to be on in 22, and then it'll be on in 26, and then it'll be on in 30. So look forward to that. So all you young sailors out there that are thinking, oh, one day, take your pick. Every 4 years, the GGR will be on. And there's some interesting things there too. We've got an interesting place in the world of round the world yacht racing. We can't go any lower. Our concept of being back to basics, no technology, simple boats, Suhaili class or the new Joshua class in 22, that stays the same. You get a boat now for this event, it's competitive for the next event, although I bet you they build the mast a lot stronger next time. But the idea of the boats being the same saves a huge amount of money, and already some of the entrants are talking about doing it again in 22. So the event will evolve and carry on, but the principles will stay exactly the same. This is a sailors event for ordinary sailors in ordinary boats that want to chase a very serious challenge. Malcolm Collins, can Isfan get medical advice for these fungus, maybe the issue with his nails? I don't know whether some of you may have seen that. It's on the lives that we did. He's got a lot of mould in the boat and mildew and so on, and he's got something going on with his fingernails. Yes, any entrant can get any amount of medical information. We have MSOS UK. They're our medical 24-hour telemedicine experts. They're on standby for any major or minor incidents. There's a very sophisticated first aid kit on board, all supplied by MSOS Direct, and they can just pick up their satellite phone and ring them and get any advice. Igor hasn't done that. Istvan hasn't done that yet, but he's more than welcome to, and he knows that. So medical advice is there. How does a wind vane cope when there's no winds but there's a big sea? Well, basically it doesn't. If there's no wind, first of all, you're not going to get your flip-flop vane here working. The wind is the sensor that tells the pendulum blade here, or the rudder on a hydrovane, when the boat goes off course. So if there's no wind, or very low wind, and this is probably what the question was relaying to, you've got challenges. And here's the issue. You can have and you think, oh, there's no wind, the boat's not moving, so you don't need to steer. Well, that's not quite right, because it all comes down to apparent wind. So if you imagine this, you've got a boat speed of about 4 knots going downwind, the wind's behind me, and so if the boat's doing 4 knots and there's, say 12 knots of wind, apparent wind, true wind, so you've got 4 knots that way, it means you're going to get 8 knots of wind over the boat. So the apparent wind over the boat is 8 knots, and the boat is sailing at 4 knots that way. So 8 knots of wind is not a lot to tell the boat when it's off course, okay, if you're running downwind. And so, but the boat speed's 4 knots, so it needs some good inputs. So there are issues, and that's one of the times with any wind vane, whether it's an auxiliary rudder wind vane like the hydrovane, or a servo pendulum like the Monitor or the Aries, they have challenges. And that's one of the issues of sailing in the GGR. You don't get electric autopilot. You've got to manage it the best way you can. And that's something I'm going to write about soon, because I think now people are understanding how serious and how huge the challenge of the GGR really is. We love all the other round the world races. They're all incredibly challenging and demanding, and peak athletes, all that stuff, and so there's no issue there. But the GGR is just so different. It's 220 odd days without much contact, with no technology, all that. It's grueling. It's seriously hard, and I think a lot of people are starting to see that now. Now that Jean-Luc might be in a challenging situation in terms of the event, we may be down to 7 entrants. We started with 17 across the line at the beginning. That's tough. It's not through bad planning or bad boats or bad sailors. It's just tough. Anyway, okay. Dave Moran was asking about the Q flags. Now, Q flag is a yellow flag. It's an international flag. If you arrive in a country for the first time, you put your Q flag up, and it says you're requesting pratique, like customs, immigration, all those sorts of things. So he was also asking, some were flying it, some weren't, and what preparations do we do to bring the entrants here? Well, first of all, every entrant has to apply for an Australian visa. So they've all got visas to come here, just in case something goes wrong and they've got to go ashore. That's the first thing we did. As they're arriving, we're talking to Australian Border Force all the time, updating them, and biosecurity as well, and updating them on progress. When they get here, it's not required to fly the Q flag to come into the film drop anchor buoy, because that's what they're doing, and it's all pre-notified, and they're not actually entering the country, and so it's not required. But when you seek a port of refuge, or you go and anchor for protection from the storm, like Suzy and Istvan did, it is a requirement to fly the Q flag, because you're not cleared or entered into the country. So when Istvan was up in Southport Bay, anchored from the storm, he was flying a Q flag. When Suzy was down in Safety Cove, it was the same, flying a Q flag. Once they set sail, they take it down. So that's the relevance of that. But the others don't need to if they're just coming into the anchor spot. Rislan Rosettes, Mark Slats mentioned at one point that he was happy to see a 7-day forecast was looking okay, and yet the radio ham operator guys don't give 7-day forecasts. They only give it a couple of days. He wondered where that came from. Probably came from me, because when we're doing our calls, the safety calls or whatever, or if the entrant calls me, because remembering they can call us if they're super concerned about something. They can't call anyone else. They can call us. I might give them the weather for a day or two just to make sure that, and then I'll say, as a general comment, I'll say, and it appears to be in the next 5 or 6 days there's no real storms, so you're probably going to be okay. And not only that very rarely happens, but here's the cut. The comms are so good now with some of them that the radio operators are actually recording the audio of my live updates that I give all of you, right? and then replaying it back to the sailors. So my live updates that I'm giving you about the weather map and where everyone is and so on, they're actually hearing that sometimes, not all the time, but I know Mark Slats has had it 4 or 5 times. And so when I say to you, oh, they're looking pretty good, you know, this next weather for the next 7 days looks okay, Mark's getting that sometimes. So that's where that comes from. So pretty interesting stuff. And they're, yeah. Anyway, so Margaret Keys, how do the sailors keep mould out of their boats? Well, I'm not sure. You got to, obviously the first thing you got to try and keep it clean. You got to keep air going through it, but a lot of them took all their vents off, so they're not getting a lot of fresh air through there. You need plenty of sunlight. They're not getting a lot of that because they're in the Southern Ocean. So it's a beautiful place to grow mould. But, you know, it was interesting. Isfan talked about his boat being like a cave with all this, that and the other. I would have thought they could have got in there and given it a clean. It's really hard on material, but smooth surfaces, you can wipe it down with any number of things. But everyone sails their own way, and I've got no idea how they can keep it down. One last question from Jocelyn Newman. Some of the boats have got wheels, some have got tillers. Is there an advantage for one or the other? Well, yes and no. First of all, the biggest advantage, I suppose, is that with a tiller, it's simple. There's nothing to go wrong. You're not going to break your steering because it's just a lump of wood stuck onto the rudder, so it's direct. So I would prefer a tiller normally because it's simple. Secondly, you've got better feel. But then you've got the issue, Jean-Luc's often mentioned that the Hydrovane is perfect for the rustler because the rustler tiller is very heavy to steer. There's no forward balance on that, so it's really hard work sometimes to push it. With the Hydrovane, you can lock that tiller in position, and the Hydrovane, being an auxiliary rudder, wind vane steering system, steers the boat through the Hydrovane's own rudder. So if you've got a wheel steering, you don't get that sort of overloading thing. The gearing on the wheel is geared down, so it's a lot easier to steer. So 6 of one, half does the other. Also, if you've got a servo pendulum wind vane system, you can lock it onto a tiller really easy. You don't have to have the wheel drum, and you remember that Istvan's had all sorts of trouble with his wheel drum. So normally, if you can, tiller's a lot better for this sort of stuff. It's simple, and when you're going to sail solo non-stop around the world, you want simple, you want reliable, you want bulletproof, super strong. The entrants for next race in 22 that are watching this race, I think you'll see some completely different sort of attitudes to the way the boats are prepared, the way they're cycling themselves up for it, and the way the rigs are built. So this is an evolving thing. Anyway, that's about it for now. Look forward to seeing you when we get Tapio in here, and I'm not sure where that is. And if you're in Hobart, I'm speaking here tonight, so see you then. Thanks.